Forward looking, laying it off. Gaston! Hat trick!
Ariel sends it in off of Gressel. Made it to Elliott. Oh, the bicycle! Julian Carranza! A spectacular finish! Philadelphia doubles its lead.
Hello and welcome to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd, and we are almost to the start of the 2025 MLS season. We have one preseason game remaining that sees the Philadelphia Union take on CF Montreal this Friday. And we'll get into the Union's preseason so far. We'll go ahead and talk about the 3 homegrown deals that have been made official by the Philadelphia Union. Union are linked with a brand new striker, Bruno Damiani. That's the episode of tonight's title. It looks like that deal is going to be finalized. And then we're going to go ahead and just take a look at the roster, the way that it is built by Ernst Tanner in that front office. But once again, as always, you guys have seen him throughout the whole offseason. He is José Nuñez. José, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Todd. It's hard to believe that, we have a preseason match on Valentine's Day. What a treat would it be for it to be live streamed, but won't hold my breath for that. And also at the finish line, right? The 22nd, they go out to Orlando City and start the season. And hopefully, as the title of this episode shows, with an additional striker to boot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, we don't want to keep this episode too late, but, I saw you were watching José Martinez take on Neymar down in Brazil. That's an exciting game. I saw you posted, or somebody had told you, that José Martinez had just picked up an assist. So, yeah, José Martinez, former Philadelphia Union player. You'd love to see José Martinez doing well down in Brazil. Big miss, but, hopefully we talked about it last week. Jovan Lukic can go ahead and fill the void that José Martinez leaves behind. But yeah, that's an interesting match, right? José Martinez versus Neymar.
Yeah, it's one that's, as I mentioned, like totally going to be uneventful, right? And then I think within the first, 10 or 15 minutes of, certainly during the first half, immediately some pushing and shoving between Martinez and Neymar. And I think I saw why. Neymar was up to his old tricks of flicking the ball over players and just making fools out of people, and that doesn't jive well with some of these guys. So for what it's worth, it's exciting, and I look forward to seeing more of these matchups in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and talk about what is official. And we had talked about this in the past, right, with the 3 homegrown players that were they were signed. It was just waiting on the announcement by the Union. That is, Eddy Davis, Pierre, and Frankie Westfield have all been officially given homegrown deals. We see Eddy Davis signs through 2027 with an option all the way through 2029. Pierre contract through 2028 with an option for 2029. Frankie Westfield contract through 2028, option also for 2029. And if you look at the roster, and I think a big part of tonight's episode, yes, it's going to be about Bruno, but it's also going to be about the way that Ernst Tanner has constructed this roster. And looking at the roster, there's 17 players currently signed on this team that have contracts through 2026. And then when you start looking at all the homegrown players, a lot of those guys are locked up through 2028. And so I think, this is a good business, and we don't have to talk too much about this. It's official, and Frankie Westfield taking advantage of injuries in preseason and impressing a lot, it looks like, in the 3 games that the Union have played so far. Pierre playing maybe a little bit more than what he would have thought. Jacob Glesnes picks up an injury against Cincinnati. Again, we'll talk about that game here in a bit. And then Eddy Davis with the latest homegrown signing, another forward on this roster, which puts it at 6 forwards. With Bruno, that would put it at 7, and I don't know if this club needs 7, but Jose, it's official, and I feel like you had reported on 2 of those guys, Neil and Frankie, a while ago, and the club finally makes that official now with the transfer ban lifted.
Yeah, I think I reported or broke the news of Neil back in November. Whether it was after or before Thanksgiving kind of is irrelevant considering the time that has passed since. And then Frankie was shortly after the new year. So that finally came true. My understanding is that the holdup was the registration ban due to FIFA, or the FIFA registration ban due to, as it's reported, the $700 that were not delivered to Jose Riasco's youth club. So, I think and Eddy Davis, of course, don't want to forget him. But I think Eddy is going to be an interesting player to follow, but my attention sort of shifts to a blue chip prospect in terms of Pierre, a one of a kind type of profile. When you think of a 17-year-old, right, Todd, who is 6'7", I think 6'6", like an unbelievable frame. Already having these practices, trials, you're splitting hairs when you kind of use that terminology out in Europe with teams in Germany and in Spain as well. And frankly, a player that, as I mentioned when it was announced, I have a very hard time seeing him sticking around past 2026, 2027. But if he was to wait, I think, till he's 21, 22 and just continue to play in Union colors, I could totally see how this guy goes ahead and breaks the transfer fee, record transfer fee that was Moises Bombito. I think Neil Pierre is just one unbelievable talent that could the sky's the limit. I honestly didn't even think that he would sign with the Union as a homegrown when I was sort of thinking about what his next steps were. But that's enough about him. With Frankie Westfield, I think he's a guy who is going to take advantage of just about everything possible, right? In terms of injuries, opportunities, just which are technically one and the same, but somebody who has just got this incredible amount of grit, certainly tons of passion as we've watched him in MLS Next Pro, not nearly as much as our friends over at the one show, the one team we agree on, but nonetheless, a guy that just works so hard. And Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I recall, he was maybe a week away from reporting to Penn State to play, but instead decided to take the Union 2 deal. And, it was sort of thinking what was going to happen and eventually turning it into a homegrown deal. So you can't feel anything but joy for him. And frankly, from what no pun intended, Frankie has shown a lot of really good signs of somebody who can hang with these players, especially the Slavia Prague and the Aarhus games. It just really, really did well. So 2 exciting prospects that I think will stick. And I guess we can talk about the rest later.
Yeah, and so real quick, I'm glad you brought up Neil Pierre, and then we'll move on to the next soon-to-be signing. Is you had mentioned it right there that you don't believe that Neil Pierre is going to be with his club past 2026, and Eric had mentioned on here on Twitter saying, I hope he sticks around for a long time too, when you were talking about Neil. And I think you and I, Jose, are in the same agreement that this kid's just super talented. And you look at the likes of Austin Trusty, who, when Ernst Tanner came here, he sold him to Colorado Rapids, and then the Rapids move him to Arsenal, and then he goes to Sheffield United, then he's now at Celtic. And how crazy is that Austin Trusty was playing today in Champions League against Bayern Munich, been playing in Champions League this year with Celtic. And then you have, obviously, Mark McKenzie, who leaves the club, goes to Genk, and now he's with Toulouse out in Ligue 1 in France. 2 high prospects that have come through the Union's academy, center back wise, and to think that Neil Pierre could potentially be better than both of those guys. And we had saw in the past that Neil was training with Borussia Mönchengladbach out in Germany. And, seeing that, a lot of people are like, there's no way this kid signs. There's no way that this kid signs with the Union because he's already getting looks in Europe. And the one thing I would add is this isn't untypical because we've seen it with Quinn Sullivan. We saw it with Kevin Sullivan. They had trained with Dortmund in the past. And so this is, the Union did this for a lot of their players, right? They allowed them to go on these training stints in Europe and for European teams to get a look at them. And so I don't think that's anything unheard of. But yeah, I agree with you 100% that Neil Pierre, I'd be shocked if he's here past 2026 just because of how high the ceiling is for him. Fantastic season with Union 2 last year, just like Frankie Westfield. And we'll move on after this. But you mentioned it, Frankie, days away from going to Penn State, who we committed to in December of 2023. He gets offered a Union 2 contract, and then he had such a great season. He gets called up for the first time ever to the U.S. youth national team system, playing for the U20s down in Chile and the U20 training camp, and he impressed down there. and then he gets this homegrown deal. I mean, this is an insane 6-7 months for Frankie Westfield to see him just have a fantastic 2024 season, get rewarded with this homegrown deal, and seeing him play 3 times in the preseason so far. Michael says here, Frankie already starting. I know it's probably due to injury, but still, yeah. And part of that is because of injury, but part of it is because of, how much his kid's grown in the last 6-7 months. And so Frankie Westfield, I think, is going to get a lot of opportunities this year with the Union. Speaking of opportunities, that is the Union taking advantage of signing a forward from Nacional from Uruguay, right? Uruguay.
Uruguay.
There we go. Right. You Don Americans. But yeah, 22-year-old forward Bruno Damiani. This was reported by Daniel Solana from the Battered Herons podcast I know he's a part of. And he's really, really reliable with a whole bunch of South American players. And so this had came out late at night. And then when we all wake up, you start getting calls, Jose, and at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And you're like, yep, you reported at 7:30 and say, yep, this is official. The Union are finalizing a deal. Nothing's been reported yet or official yet by the Union. I didn't think anything would be official by the club today because
Jersey Day.
Jersey Day, exactly. They want people to look at that brand new 2025 voltage kit, I believe they're calling it. And I have the same reaction as you, and that's all we have to say about the jersey. Let the talk stay with Kyle and Jillian of the one team we agree on. But any day now, I'm expecting the announcement. And a 22-year-old forward who was on loan last year with Boston Rivers, which, funny enough, was the same club that Jose Riasco was on loan with from Union too. And the Union had just sent out Jose Riasco back out on loan once again, this time to Venezuela. But fantastic season last year for Damiani, scoring 12 goals, assisting 5, and a little bit over 3,000 minutes played last year with Boston Rivers and 38 appearances. 33 of those were starts. And a lot of mixed emotions from people on social media, and I'm sure we'll probably get those comments coming in as we are live like we've been doing the last 2-3 months on YouTube. But he had recently signed a contract extension with Nacional through December 2027, and people automatically go to transfer market and saying, oh, why are the Union paying a reported $3.4 million, which will be a club record fee that the Union will pay, 20% sell-on clauses going back to Nacional. But people are like, he's only listed at 800,000 euros on transfer market, and why are the Union paying so much money? And I wrote about this before, and I've said it multiple times on the podcast. It's not uncommon in the soccer world for players to sign contract extensions to up their value because it makes negotiating that much harder because they just signed a new deal. And yes, the club may want to move on from that player, but you're going to pay a premium because they have multiple years left on that deal. And another thing I'll add is Transfer Market hasn't updated their website since September 2024. And so I would imagine with the terrific season that Bruno had last year with Boston Rivers, that value is going to go over $1 million. And so I don't understand some fans on social media complaining that the Union are paying $3.4 million for a striker. This is a guy who was rumored to be linked with going to Newell's Old Boys in Argentina. And so to see the Union beat them out for a young 22 up-and-coming striker, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it almost feels like a small love triangle between between Nacional and Newell's and the Philadelphia Union, where the Philadelphia Union go ahead and take Jan Glavinovic, and now the Union go ahead and take Bruno Damiani, when in reality he could have gone to Newell's with the money that they're probably expecting per se, or they got actually from the loan fee and maybe a purchase fee for Glavinovic. But this is so interesting because it all sort of happened overnight. And just to give some more context, as I know it, as I'm told from sources, I went to bed at midnight, woke up to these reports. Actually, a couple of listeners were kind enough to message me like, hey, have you seen this? And I really appreciate that. It really actually is really, really helpful. So when I woke up at 5 to get on the treadmill, which lately has been more of a walk since I'm trying to change up sort of a pattern of how I run, neither here or there, I saw the text messages from people like, have you seen this? Is this true? Is this true? And I appreciate that people come to me to ask me these things, right? And all it took was for me to do 2 text messages, and it was very much a, "Yep, deal's happening, done," as I was told. Apparently, things are still moving in some way, shape, or form, whatever. And it happened very quickly. As I understand it, it sort of went from either a Friday night, Saturday morning, or Saturday night, a little bit of negotiating, and then official between Monday into Tuesday. So, or agreed upon, I should say, between Monday and Tuesday. So I know Todd, have often talked about how, these deals sometimes take time, and there's some negotiating that happens, and the back and forth, and obviously the language barrier and cultural barriers as well, in a way. This was apparently super quick, like lightning fast, I'm told, from people in South America who were sort of aware of the deal. So I think an exciting player, a frame to boot too, at 6'2", I believe, 170 pounds, 175 pounds, I think. So I do want to be super careful too and thoughtful that he does have an international cap with Uruguay, but it was sort of their, as you would call it, camp cupcake, in terms of like a lesser camp per se. But nonetheless, an official cup with a World Cup winning squad at one point, right? So I'm intrigued to see how the partnership works. But I think even more so, Todd, when you think about the following things, his fee will be, or should be, a record signing for the Philadelphia Union. So that to me is unbelievably interesting if they're believing in him, which would also shatter which would also shatter Glavinovic's option to buy if they were to trigger it. So it's like a double whammy there of like, okay, well, it's going to break it anyways. But also what it means for the current roster in terms of him joining as a young designated player, potentially, and also the squad, as you've reported so well, Todd, needing an international spot. So is there a man out who currently takes international spot, or are the Union going to go ahead and find an international spot? That's going to be really interesting to see in the coming days. And I'm sure it's happening sooner rather than later, since this man seems to be incoming quickly. And I'm sure that the Philadelphia Union will want to get him up to speed and maybe even give him some minutes on the 22nd. Certainly not playing this Friday, I can't imagine.
Yeah, so again, we will talk about the roster build for people listening live on YouTube here in a little bit. It's a good point you brought up there, Jose. I appreciate you giving me my small flowers. Don't deserve them whatsoever. You're the guy. But Eric had a question here, and I don't know if you have an understanding of this. He says, will we see it tomorrow, meaning the announcements of Bruno joining the club? For context, for people out there, there is a press conference tomorrow morning with Bradley Cornell, but this is an ordinary press conference. They've been doing this the day before games, and so I don't think they're doing anything special because of the signing of Bruno Damiani. If they were to give him a special press conference, I'd imagine that it would be next week in Chester when they're back in market. But yeah, I don't think tomorrow's press conference has anything to do with Bruno Damiani joining the club. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions asked by media. And one thing I was thinking about is, if this doesn't get asked, and maybe it will now, is looking at Bradley Cornell's first season with St. Louis. João Klaus was a huge part of their success in his first year, scoring 10 goals in 21 appearances in his debut season with St. Louis. Both of them similar strikers. Damiani listed at 6 foot, 6'1", Klaus at 6'2", 6'3", both target guys inside the box. And so I'd be curious to hear from Bradley Cornell tomorrow, does he see similarities between Klaus and Damiani? Because Klaus, like I said, was a big part of that success in the first season in St. Louis, a big signing for that club to make. And I'd be curious to see if Bradley Cornell sees any similarities. Does he want to try to play Damiani the same way he played Klaus in St. Louis? It's definitely a question to consider asking Bradley Cornell. But if you go ahead and look at other comments coming in here, a lot of good comments, guys. And I have a couple starred when we get to that segment. So keep the comments coming in here, people. But Kyle, hey, thanks for joining in. Have a great show. I appreciate it. But just again, looking at Bruno Damiani, 33 starts last year, 12 goals in a little bit over 3,000 minutes played. And the Union reportedly paying $3.4 million plus a 20% sell-on clause going back to Nacional. And again, there's people on social media saying, these are the type of signings that the Union needed to make. And one of the comments that I saw that I have started here mentions, do you think if these moves happened 2 windows ago, everyone's tone towards the team would be different? And yeah, sure, it would be different. But the Union at that point in time couldn't necessarily make these moves. They had to move players off the roster. They needed to get contracts off the book. And Jose, we'll talk about it here in a bit, but I do think that's a fair question to ask. Would this fan base be a little bit more happier if these moves had happened, say, last January? Ernst Tanner had said that they didn't have the capital. They didn't have the space to make these type of moves. And so they had to go and make buy low moves in Marcus Anderson, Sanders Ngabo, Oliver Zemla. And now when Ernst Tanner gets this roster right, gets a lot of GAM back, and a lot of people were telling me on social media, I don't care about GAM. I don't care about how much GAM they have. Well, GAM's a big reason why they're able to make these moves when they're making these moves. The over $4 million in GAM that they had to start December of 2024, and I'm sure it's a little bit lower now, is a big reason why, they can change some things around that roster. And so, yes, GAM does matter. All those trades that the Union made last year to make as much GAM as possible, they matter. And you're seeing the dividends right now pay off in the winter time. And to Ernst Tanner's credit, right? He told us at the beginning of the offseason that we're going to go out and upgrade in every single position minus the goalkeeper. We're going to get a defender. We're going to get a midfielder. We're going to get an attacker. He's done all 3. And for a fan base that has been pretty upset with him, and again, I understand why. We got a lot of negative comments last episode, Jose, saying that we're just dismissing fans' remarks, unpleasement with the way that things are going. I understand that. But at the same time, right, Ernst Tanner kept his word. He told the media, he told the fan base, this is what we're going to do. And he's went out and done it.
Yeah, and you got to commend him for that, right? More often than not, I think you would get sporting directors who are just, quiet and, don't say a peep or anything. So for him to say, yeah, we will improve, or in his opinion, improve at every single stage of the field this offseason, and actually come through with it so far, or actually have come through with it, like, it is commendable. So kudos to him. And I think you're right in terms of this roster needing to dismantle a little bit to be able to make some of these moves. And once again, already running into a little bit of discomfort when you think about needing an international spot. So still having to wiggle around and make it fit. So yeah, there's nothing more I can add. I'm excited to watch Bruno when he comes in. I'm excited to watch Jovan when we get a chance to watch him at Subaru Park, and I sure hope that Glavinovic is healthy for the match on Friday. And before we forget about the match on Friday, I think it's certainly worthwhile for us to mention a huge congratulations to Brendan Craig for earning himself a 1-year deal after being tossed around USL and MLS and different loans. So congratulations to him for earning that. Not an easy thing to do as a trialist.
And one more player forgetting. One more.
Who else am I forgetting? I'm so sorry.
The pride of Harford County, Maryland.
Cole Turner. Congratulations to him. Former
back to Loudoun United. Let's go, Cole. Dealt with a ton of injuries last year with Loudoun, and so he's back with the club, option for 2026. And yeah, you love to see it, right? A guy who is from Maryland. I'm always going to support that guy. Wish that he got more opportunities with the Union, but I understand why he did not. And to still see him playing professional soccer, I'd love to see it. But yeah, Brendan Craig too, signing a 1-year deal with a whole bunch of options in Montreal. And I think, quite frankly, this is probably a system that's going to fit his skill set a little bit better. A team that plays 3 center backs. Yeah, I know that Montreal went out and made a huge trade for Jalen Neal from LA Galaxy, they're a very, very young team, Montreal, and much like the Union, right? They went younger, got a lot to prove, and it will be interesting to see how Montreal does this season. They're a team that had just missed out on the playoffs last year. Will they make the playoffs this year with the Union? We shall see. But yeah, congrats to Brandon Craig. Congrats to Cole Turner as well. But again, yeah, I have nothing else to really add here about Bruno. I think, again, there's a big statement by the Union. I understand why the fan base feels like they should have made these moves 2 winters ago. But quite frankly, they couldn't. The roster didn't allow for them to make those deals, which leads us into talking point number 3 on the night. I feel like we're rolling through the podcast, Jose, which is good. That's exactly what we want to see. But yeah, once Bruno becomes official, that will put the Union's roster at 30 players, and MLS allows you to sign 30 players max. You can have a 31st spot, but that 31st spot has to be loaned out to a lower division. And so the Union have done this the last couple of years with Nelson Pierre being down at Union 2, Nick Pariano being down with Union 2 last season. Jeremy Raffanello, if I'm not mistaken, has been on loan the whole season with Union 2. And so, yeah, I fully expect the Union to put somebody down there. I don't really see that being Nelson Pierre. Eddy Davis, maybe a candidate, I think. Like I had said, once Bruno becomes official, that's 7 strikers on this roster. It's a lot of strikers to keep on, and not a lot of spots. You had mentioned it, Jose, the international spot. I've been trying to keep fans informed as much as I could on social media, on this podcast, with my writing. And for all those people that pay attention to that and now has become a talking point, yeah, good. I'm glad to inform these people. That's why Jose and myself do what we do, to make this the most informed fan base possible. But last week, I asked, I'm going to say Carlos Cornell. I have no clue why that name came to my mind. Bradley Cornell. Maybe because they were both with New York Red Bulls. But I asked Bradley Cornell about the Union having no more international spots once they made the signing of Lucas official. For fans unaware, the Union had traded a 2025 and 2024 international roster slot to Nashville last year in return for $350,000 in GAM. And so the Union, instead of starting the season with 8, they only had 7. Lukic became that 7th. And this is what Bradley Cornell had to say in terms of players potentially getting the green card.
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously we like to try and get those guys who sort of express some interest for the green card. We never want to force that on them. But yeah, it's always interesting to see who would like to start that process. And yeah, but right now, we have our contingency full, that's okay with that for now. And we'll observe the market and continue to see. And if we need to make more moves, we'll make more moves, and which then, could, if we need to get a roster spot somewhere, or if we need to get an international spot somewhere, we will definitely, pursue those avenues. But right now, there's nothing to report there.
All right, so that was last week. Nothing to report there, Bradley Cornell says. And I think it's going to take a lot trying to get Bradley to peel open as much as Jim Curtin did last year. I mean, Jim Curtin was pretty straightforward. Bradley does a good job, just not mixing his words, but just tippy-toeing that line, sliding away from the questions asked. And so I know you and I had talked, Jose, that, maybe you're going to give a dig at it tomorrow and see if Bradley can open up even more tomorrow during his press conference. But yeah, no player, it seems like, is close to getting a green card, which means the Union have to go out and trade for a international roster slot, which have been going between $175,000 to $200,000 this year. Majority of that business has been done by Inter Miami this year. I think they are up to 13 international slots because, all the international players on there. And so I don't know if teams are making Inter Miami pay a pretty penny because it's Inter Miami, or if that's what the going rate's going to be. But yeah, I do think this is pretty typical for this time of the year to pay between 175 to 200,000. But you and I got talking, and this was a comment by Jay-Z. I wonder if it is the real actual Jay-Z. Maybe it is. Zemla should be the next green card candidate. Been here since college. And you and I had discussed this, Jose, and I think you had done a really good job convincing me. What if the Union actually decided to loan out or potentially sell Oliver Zemla? Yes, you would need another goalkeeper, which means I think, Mike Sheridan, which some people say, yeah, he's not a MLS starting goalkeeper, but how often do third choice goalkeepers play, right? And I know last year was the exception for the Union with the injuries to Andre Blake and international duty and all that, but I think Andrew Rick's ready to answer the call when Blake's away on international duty, and God forbid anything happens again to Andre or, Andrew Rick, then, you need that third choice goalkeeper. But you had done a really good job convincing me that maybe Oliver Zemla could potentially be moved.
Yeah, and I think to just kind of walk through my idea, I have no inside knowledge whether or not Oliver Semla is the target that's going to move, but here's sort of where my thinking is. Who mentioned the message? Who messaged? Was it Jay-Z? Yeah, Jay-Z mentioned it, and that touched on it. When Semla joined out of the blue from Louisville, I remember reaching out to folks at the club and just asking about him, and international spot for a goalkeeper, that seems a little rare, sort of feels like a wasted opportunity, especially for a number 2. So what I was told was that, yeah, with his experience, was it Marshall? I think it was Marshall College.
Mitchell.
Yeah, he has enough years there and has been in the U.S. through the USL games, USL seasons with Danny Cruz of all people over at Louisville City. That for him to get his green card was sort of, I don't want to say the expectation, but sort of what this person was sort of thinking. Like, yeah, this is what we're planning, right? 2024 season, he comes in, he plays, takes his international spot. We have a few of them, no issue. Next summer or next offseason, I should say, Oliver will go ahead and get his international, his green card. Fast forward to now, this quote you just got from, or we got from Bradley mentioning that nobody's starting this process. Okay, that's interesting. I go ahead and reach out to someone else at the club, different from the person who told me initially about Oliver, sort of the plan for him to get his green card, and mentioning, yeah, I don't think that's happening. There's some other factors that are getting that potentially changing that. I don't see that as a confirmation of anything, just sort of, another piece of thought. And the reality is, for a goalkeeper, never mind a number 2, and you could even debate a number 3 goalkeeper taking an international spot, feels like a huge waste. That I could see a world where Oliver maybe is the odd man out, and you sort of solve a problem, right? You get a roster spot as well as an international spot all at once. So we'll see. Obviously, they could go out and just purchase through GAM international spot, but I think that moving Oliver is the one that makes the most sense. He's always been nice to you and I, or anybody who's talked to him at post-match press conferences. So nothing against the guy, just sort of, the way that last season sort of played out makes it difficult to justify a number 2 and arguably a number 3 behind a homegrown.
Yeah, I agree. Just looking at the comments here, I'm assuming this is Union Nate, maybe potentially on Twitter. UN Snake, Semla or Alawetu potentially on the way out. I don't think Alawetu would be on the way out. Zemla,
I think Bradley likes him a lot.
I do too. I mean, yeah, it probably helps that they're both from South Africa, but yeah, you need center backs, right? I mean, you can't go into the season with only 3 center backs on this roster. And I do expect Makanya to play more. I mean, how about that yellow card that he picked up? And I guess we can talk about that here in a little bit. But yeah, this is a guy who's taking advantage of injuries to Jacob Glesnes and Jan, and he's playing as much as he can in the preseason. But again, we'll talk about the preseason here in a bit. But yeah, just looking at where this roster stands, 30 players once Bruno joins, and okay, if you do loan out or sell Oliver Zemla, then obviously that opens up the spot. You would give the international roster slot to Bruno. But then what do you do about the third choice goalkeeper? You're obviously going to need one on the roster. And so I think it makes sense to me. You loan out a Nelson Pierre. I don't see how he fits in with this roster. I think he's probably past playing in MLS Next Pro. They loaned him out last season twice, once in Sweden, and then once with Charlotte Independence and USL 1. Maybe something happens there because, again, I mean, 7 strikers on this roster once Bruno signs. That's too many. And if we take a look at the roster, we're going to go ahead and try something different. I know that I usually share from Excel or through Twitter, so hopefully people can see this a little bit better. Going to go ahead and show the roster. This is what I had said. I could see the roster being with Damiani playing on the left, Baribo playing up top to the right. The Union 2 have been playing a 4-2-2 formation throughout preseason. No more of the diamond, but I'm sure it's going to play similar, maybe a little bit more different pressing cues. Instead of having 2 outside 8s, you have 2 attacking midfielders, Daniel Gaza, Quinn Sullivan as the 2 out wide. And then at the 6s, you have Danley and Lukic. And then your center backs, you have Glavinovic and Glesnes, the right back, Harriel, who's been hurt throughout the whole preseason. So maybe come February 22nd against Orlando City, maybe that's Frankie Westfield getting the start because Olivier Baizu is also dealing with a little bit of a knock. And then obviously you still have Kai Wagner, but this is the way that I see the roster standing out right now. Again, I have it listed, and again, I know people are probably listening to this on the podcast feed. Join us sometime on YouTube. We do all nice visual stuff for you guys, but yeah, I have it listed under all the international players. I have it listed under homegrowns, and this is a very, very young roster, Jose, and it's interesting just watching how this roster is being constructed, where you have multiple homegrown players on this team, and it's not a bad thing. This is a pretty young squad, and it makes sense if you want to play a high pressing team. Young players should have the legs, they should have the energy to press. But just looking at this roster again, I'd expect a Nelson Pierre to potentially be loaned out, if not sold. Marcus Anderson, I think he'll get his chances here. I wouldn't be against, potentially loaning out a David Vasquez. I do think he's probably too good for MLS Next Pro, if I'm being honest. I don't know how much minutes he'll get next year or this year with the Union. So, I mean, if the Union got a good offer to potentially loan out David Vasquez, maybe USL, I think that would make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of hit on a lot of what I've been thinking. I think, Damiani, Ua, Anderson, Baribo, Donovan, Eddy, and I think Nelson is probably one that just, again, I don't mean to be mean to the player, but I'd probably one that's probably, done his time in MLS per se in terms of a contract. And Eddy, I could see why not send him to Lyngby. I mean, I'm sorry I didn't mention it earlier, but Eddy also had international trials abroad with Schalke 2 and Lyngby for a weekend change. So I could see a world where Eddy, maybe this is a flex of the partnership, not even partnership, of the small ownership bit that the Union have in Lyngby. Send Eddy Davis out there and continue to work on his game. Can you bring that up again? Sorry. It's actually just super helpful. But additionally to that, David Vasquez, USL, send him to Lyngby, where, you sort of have a vested interest in terms of, you can manipulate the minutes that he can play in a way, strongly suggesting that he gets some game time, or continue to fill out the Union 2 roster with some of these players. And there you have 100% the ability to manipulate the number of minutes that they get. So David, I think that CJ stays. David could go on a loan. Eddy goes on a loan, and sort of start solving some of these problems of just having a roster that's entirely too big. And again, if we're going to go ahead and trust what Ernst Tanner has said, which we have no reason to doubt, considering how thorough he was in his promise of improving or adding to each portion of the match, he did also say that the ideally for him, yes, the biggest roster possible is the best roster possible. But in reality, when you're as a team competing in 2 competitions, do you really need 30 players, or could you get away with 25, 26 and give some of those other guys an opportunity to get some game time that otherwise would just be practice time. So I'm still sort of working in my head, how does this roster narrow down to 25, 26, maybe 27? And, we're sort of speaking about some players that realistically could depart the club in terms of Oliver Semla, but also come in and take some of these pieces to places that you can manipulate minutes, but also places where they maybe cannot as much, and give them an opportunity to fight. You are muted, my friend.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jose. A lot of comments coming in on social media. I appreciate it, guys, on YouTube, Twitter. Union A brings up an interesting point that I hadn't considered: Gavin Atkinson and the goalkeeping combo as an off-roster homegrown. Maybe
With Union too, right now.
Yeah, exactly. And you also have Cello, who you reported and got from San Jose, and a big prospect, as big as Kevin Sullivan. I think you had reported at the time too, in terms of goalkeepers. Yeah, I mean, it's a good shout there by Union 8. Gavin Atkinson, could he be in the combo? Yeah, it's something I didn't consider. Maybe it is something I should consider now. Somebody, Michael had said, I feel like Baribo would be a better fit with a high press if that's what we intend on doing. And you and I talked about this, right? Where it makes sense. You put Damiani and Ty Baribo up there playing for 60, 65 minutes. You bring one of those guys off after all the pressing they had just done. And now you bring Mikel Uhre to go against tired legs. He's a guy who's great at going north and south. And I got to imagine that's something that those center backs would not want to see, is a fresh legs, a quick player in Mikel Uhre, which reminds me of what the Union did a couple seasons ago with Sergio Santos. And maybe some people listening, maybe people in the comment section will be like, well, I don't want to pay a guy $2+ million coming off the bench to be a bench option. But I think time's going to be split between all three of those guys. I don't think anybody's a lock in up top. Bradley Cornell, during his time with St. Louis, rotated his roster all the time. And that's something that Union fans, us in the media, aren't used to seeing under Jim Curtin. We could predict who was going to be in the starting lineup week in, week out. We knew there wasn't going to be many substitutions, but under Bradley Cornell, I don't think that's going to be the case. He's going to give everybody the chance. But I do think going forward, Damiani and Baribo probably is the best way forward. Jay-Z, a lot of good comments from you, says, with Damiani and Baribo in the fold, Uhre's time at the Union extending beyond 2025 does not seem likely. And that's a good point too. I'll bring up another graphic here. Looking at the contracts for players through 2026. I had mentioned it a little bit, trying to get rid of this comment so you guys can see it. But yeah, maybe it's a little bit harder to see. Can you see that, Jose?
I sure can. Jay-Z is a very knowledgeable person.
They are. I wonder who that is. Like I said, maybe it is the actual Jay-Z. But yeah, a lot of players here under contract through 2026. All in all, 17 players. I had said actually it should be updated. This is the old picture I have because I don't have Lukic on here. I don't have Eddy Davis on here, so I'll have to update this. But yeah, regardless, 17 players are signed through 2026. Mikel Uhre and Alejandro Bedoya, the only two players that don't have options for 2026 after this season, they're free agents. And it makes a lot of sense to me, Jose, right? Where you talked about it, Damiani going to be a young designated player. And so do the Union go that 3DP route? Do they go that 3 U22 players, or do they buy down to Daniel Gazdag, which, looking at this, I'll pull this up for you, Jose. I meant to say it to you before we record it, but I know we had issues getting you the link to join the show. MLS. Can you see that?
I sure can.
All right. So looking under here where it says salary parameters, the compensation ceiling for such eligible players is set at $1,743,000 million. And Daniel Gazdag last year was making, can you see this? The MLSPA?
I cannot.
All right. So Daniel Gazdag last year was making 175 $1,757,000 last year. And looking again just at the MLSPA, sorry, fumbling over my words. Looking back at this screen, this is what we need a producer. Somebody who can just flip through all the screens and I don't have to multitask at once. But
Eric, tryouts.
Yeah, exactly. Looking back at this, would this mean that Daniel Gazdag isn't eligible to be bought down? I know Mikal Uwer isn't, but looking at the guaranteed salary that Gazdag got last year, it seems like Daniel Gazdag isn't eligible to be bought down.
I'll have to take a look at it closer. Yeah.
Yeah. Again,
but to me, the most important part of what you're displaying right now is that budget charge for 21 to 23-year-olds during in the young designated budget charge to be able to pay Bruno anything above 200 and only hit at 200 is such a helpful mechanism. It's unfortunate that he's joining at such a time where he technically doesn't fit into like an additional $50,000 off if he was a U22 initiative player or a young designated player. What does it say right there? Yeah, 20-year-old or younger during the league year. So it's I still think that they're navigating this budget so interestingly, and I almost want to say well, but I also know I'm not the most knowledgeable on it. But it seems like they really are trying to maximize this as best as they can, considering the restraints that they have.
Yeah, exactly. And Mikal Uwer, you're paying him over $2 million this season, and he's a free agent after this year. I mean, that's a lot of money coming off. I mean, you look at all the salary that the Union have shaved off within just this last two windows, with Julian Kranza making $1 million, I believe it was. Jose Martinez making $674,000. And then you look at the contracts of Leon Flock making $314,000, Damian Lowe $343,000, Sam Dinron, which is so crazy to me, only making $94,000 last year. Insane. Badesio made more than him. Sorry, Jose. Around $98,000. Jack Elliott at $893,000. I mean, the Union are saving over $2 million in salary with all the players that they let go of. And yes, you bring in these homegrown players who are going to have a smaller salary, a smaller cap hit, and then Bruno being a young designated player. I mean, Ernst Tanner's done a terrific job getting this roster in a healthy place. And again, going back to a comment earlier saying, would fans be complaining if they would have made these moves 2 windows ago? Well, the truth of the matter is they couldn't. And now they're finally in a place where they can. And you have 10, 11 players who have options for next season for 2026. And I'd imagine not all those options are going to be picked up next year. But again, let's get through this season first. But yeah, Ernst Tanner's done a really good job turning this roster around and getting it into a financially stable place where they can make multiple moves if they so choose.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I just got a message. Can you repeat your question? I'm so sorry. I just got a message that I'm shocked by.
No, just that the Union's roster is in such a more stable place than it was 2 windows ago. And, if they were to go out and make potentially more moves, yes, they have to loan out players to get within that cap of max players they have of 30. But yeah, I mean, this roster is in a spot where they could potentially make more moves if they felt the need to.
Yeah, they could. And to me, what's really interesting is that, and I think someone was a little enjoying these moves, especially after Bruno. Someone had mentioned on social media that this is a top 5 squad. Don't tell me otherwise. It's like, let's not get carried away. I think compared to where the squad ended last year to where it is today, even though they've only added 3 players, it feels drastically different when you look at. I think. Yes, it was only 38 minutes, but Jan Glavinovic looked good against Slavia Prague, right? And then you throw in Jovan Lukic, who played 40 some minutes against Cincinnati after only being with the squad for a few days. Like, that's again, like, played fairly well. And Bruno, I have no reason to doubt him until he plays. So I don't see how this team is not better than last year, but I also don't know if this equals to making the playoffs, considering how other teams have also gotten better. Not saying that spending more means success, but there are teams that have genuinely gotten a heck of a lot better. There's no denying that Charlotte has improved drastically. There's no denying that Atlanta, with all of their spending, may have gotten better. We'll have to see if who's the coffee guy, Latte, right?
Yes.
I can't remember his first name, but I know his last name's Latte. If he's worth what they're paying, I can't imagine that he's worth what he's paying. If they're paying that much money, he better be scoring, 20 minutes. And as Eric mentions astutely, some of these signings are going to feel like new, or some of these players are going to feel like relatively new signings. Because if you really think about it, Barrivo only had maybe half a season once he finally broke in during Leagues Cup, and it took a double yellow in Leagues Cup to slow him down a little bit, and it was the stupidest double yellow possible. So it really does feel like this roster is very different, and they're navigating it and what I find to be interesting, right? And buying low and selling high, and maybe that's the football manager / FIFA in my head, but to me it's exciting to find the next player versus maybe spending a ton of money. And I say that while I have, two Manchester City kids around my head, but nonetheless, it's to me, it's fun to see. And I know it may not please everybody, but that's okay.
For sure, for sure. Let's go ahead and wrap this show up, or about to wrap this show up, with the Union falling to FC Cincinnati last Friday 4-1 in their third preseason game. The Union are 0-3 so far in the preseason. I don't buy too much into the record. They have 2 goals scored. I don't buy too much into that. Jacob Glesnes scores off of a Kai Wagner corner kick. Nice set piece there by Jacob Glesnes. We had talked about it. Aloetu Makanya picking up a yellow card, a crazy tackle in a friendly game. But
unreal.
I think it shows you that it's not blood loss between these two clubs. And you go ahead and look. Jacob Glesnes exits this game because bleeding in the head. So Neil Pierre comes in. And Nathan Harriel, Bradley had told us last week, is dealing with a thigh strain, I believe he said it was. And then Olivier Bizo and Jan Glavinovich, both dealing with little knocks. And so hopefully those guys are able to play this week, because God forbid we see Jeremy Raffanello playing as a center back once again.
Yeah, definitely don't want to see that. And no offense to Jeremy, but man, he's really been sort of a utility Swiss Army knife type of player in terms of the positions he's played over the past 24 days, the last few months, right? And so, yeah, I don't know what to make out of that game, right? Because those first 40 minutes were probably the most telling, maybe the first 60. And then after that, after the substitutions that were forced due to injury, but also part of the game plan, as Bradley Cornell flat out told the press ahead of the game. After the 60th, that's when I felt comfortable going to pick up my Chinese food. So when I came back, and it was, I hate to call it sort of like, like, these are not going to be starters. These are players that are maybe going to feature, and we got a Stas Karzanowski sighting late into the match, which they drafted him. I had an idea that he was involved with Union 2. I didn't know that he would go ahead and feature with the main team, and has been continued to be pictured with the team, I think, periodically here. So did they sign him? Is he a Union 2 player? I have no idea. So what to get out of it is, honestly, if you have a recording, and shout out, wink wink, to the person in this chat who hooked me up with a recording that no longer exists because I deleted it, of course. Those first 40, 50, 60 minutes, the Union looked pretty good. I wish they were more dangerous. I wish they would create more, but once again, rewinding back to Bradley Cornell signaling how his games are going to go, 60%, the goals are going to come from turnovers up on the field, 30% from set pieces, and 10% from buildup, if I recall, was the sentence he said to us, which is more or less exactly what happened that match. Though the goal that came in from Glasses was from a set piece. But a set piece that was earned from pressing very, very high. So I don't know. This if you enjoy those 60 minutes of soccer that the Union played against Cincinnati, you're probably gonna love this season.
Yeah, and so I mean, for me, I think some people on social media, and again, I mean, people on social media don't speak for this whole fan base. And I was talking to Matt Ralph a couple days ago, and I said, there's probably some people in this fan base that come March 1st against Cincinnati, they're going to show up and be like, "Where's Jim Curtin?" I mean, yes, the people
Yeah,
on
dude.
social media are so vocal about their displeasure with this team. But there's also people in this fan base, I feel like, that don't feel that way that these people on social media feel. There's some people in this fan base that are going to show up and be like, "What happened to Jim Curtin?" And their seat partners are going to be explaining to them how he got fired. And so, yeah, I mean, it's so hard to get a telling on a read on this fan base. The good thing is, we've got a lot of positive comments tonight. We have hey Travman says off topic, but I met Raffanello at a bowling alley once. Yeah, the dude does love his bowling. But yeah, I think that it's hard to tell exactly how this fan base feels about starting 0-3. I don't think it's a big deal. Like I said, it's preseason. You're learning a new style of play. Well, a little bit different style of play. Again, pressing cues are going to be a little bit different. They're going to press a lot more than they have the last couple years. You're playing a different formation, a 4-2-2, which shouldn't be that much different than a diamond. And then in transition, they go into a 4-2-3-1. So, yeah, a little bit tactical changes, but I think overall, I mean, it's not going to be that big of a difference playing style-wise from a 4-2-2 to a 4-4-2 diamond. But yeah, I don't think the fans on social media that are all concerned, all upset with starting 0-3, I don't think it's anything to be too concerned about.
Yeah, it's preseason. Again, this was a preseason where we saw players like Jeremy Raffanel playing center back, and I don't know if it's patented, but like Oliver Semla's like jump and just sort of like standing still type of thing coming out of the net. So I don't draw too much of it outside of like specific player performances. And sure, have I gone overboard in cutting some of these like 2-minute clips of all the
Yeah.
touches of certain players? Maybe I've done too many of them. I don't know. I've just find myself with a little bit of time since it's right after games. But I'm really eager to see a match where Jan Glavinovic, where there's a spine, right? Where you have Jan Glavinovic, you have Jovan, and then you have Bruno, and see, I'm not going to realistically expect beautiful soccer where they're going to link all three in one sequence, but can there be a way where these three work together and improve this team? I think so, and I hope so. So I'm excited to see Friday. And before I forget, Todd, let's not forget that the Union announced Mitch Hildeberg. I can't remember how you say his last name. Hildebrand. Yeah. They announced the assistant coach for the Philadelphia Union officially after I did it. What was it, like mere minutes before the press conference? Yes. So could they do that for Bruno? I doubt it. I like to think that they might try to roll the red carpet out since it's literally the most expensive player that they've bought. But I don't know. I can't imagine that any one player gets the treatment that like Jack McGlynn's getting at Houston right now, which is unbelievable. Every other picture or video is Jack McGlynn. It's kind of wild.
As it should be. I mean, that's a huge signing that they made. I mean, guy balled out with the U.S. in January. So you get a terrific midfielder, one of the best, I think, even at his age in MLS. Yeah, should make it all about Jack McGlynn. And if he stays the whole season with Houston, I guarantee he's going to finish with 15 plus assists. I'll say 16 assists. And I'll take it a step further, not hockey assist. Assist alone. I mean, that dude, in a system that fits his skill set, if he stays the whole season with Houston, 16 assists throughout the season. I'm gonna go ahead and put that as my hot take. But yeah, a lot of multitasking this episode, Jose. A lot trying to try something different, make it easier for people to pay attention to the pictures that I put up instead of just sharing on Twitter. Then I decided, let's go ahead and try to share the MLS page, the MLSPA. A lot of multitasking. Need a producer. But as always, Jose, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Jose R. Nunes 91. X, I guess, is the name. I have a similar account at Blue Sky where I try my best to post. I need to figure out some sort of posting bot or service. There was one that I signed up for and I continue to forget to use. So I'll try my best there. Tomorrow, I'll be doing an Ask Me Anything session with the Philadelphia Union subreddit. So if you want to join and ask a question, by all means, I'll try to answer it. I think it starts at like 8:30. So I'll just be on my laptop plugging away and answering some questions. I submitted all the paperwork and I think everything's gone well. So I guess I can share. I'll be periodically writing for the league website. So I'll be writing for MLS.com for specific match days, providing recaps or writing short stories about the games and points that, pay attention to this game or this or that. So it's exciting. I'm excited. And it's a nice little, next step on what I'm doing on this little side gig of mine. So I appreciate all of you for supporting and following my work.
Don't forget about us little guys, Jose. Don't, as Mark says. So,
and before I forget, AAT Sports, well, we're going to come back on a more regular cadence. So with Mike and Dave, as we ease into the season, you'll find us there as well.
Yeah, there you go. Can't forget about Mike and Dave, who I think last week recorded an episode. So check that out if you guys haven't. Mike and Dave do terrific work, and I appreciate them for letting Jose be loaned out to the Free Kick for the off season. But yeah, off to bigger and better things with MLS, Jose. So I'm sure you forget about all of us, but it's been a blast having you here on the show and just hanging out with all of us little guys. But if you guys aren't following the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, follow at Free Kick Pod, wherever you get your podcasts of the Free Kick. Check out the YouTube channel live every podcast on YouTube, youtube.com/Free Kick Pod. And check out my writing, the podcast, goals breakdown, these videos on Substack by searching thefreekick.substack.com. I feel like there's something I'm forgetting, Jose, but we're past an hour. We didn't want to go past an hour, so we'll end the podcast right here. So if it's something that's that important, then I'll make a tweet about that. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is the Free Kick Podcast.